Everybody, good afternoon. It's Tuesday, and it's 2 o'clock somewhere, so it's time for Tech Until Tuesday. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm just putting together some slides for everyone. Being that we are on the verge of a national day of, first was the National Day of Protest coming up on June 14th, and then it was the National Day of Action. And most recently now it's the National Day of Resistance. So being that we are on the cusp of a National Day of Resistance, we're going to talk about how an intelligence planner should approach dealing with a riot or dealing with civil unrest. What are the things that you should be doing as an intelligence practitioner, as your community S2, your ACE chief, whatever and whoever you are? And chances are good that if you're watching this video, you're probably the intelligence officer for your area. You may not think of yourself that way. Others may not think of you that way. But if you're watching this channel, the Tech Intel Tuesday specifically, that's probably you, whether you realize it, whether anyone else realizes it or not. And it's better for you to realize it because there are some very simple things that you can do to get much better prepared. And you may be thinking, Mike, I live in a rural area and I will never be confronted by Antifa Black Bloc. I will never have rioters rioting in my tiny little town, which is probably true. But you should still, the same intelligence planning tasks that we do to prepare for a riot are the exact same things that you would do to prepare for or very similar to things you would do to prepare for a wildfire or a hurricane or a blizzard or a cyber attack or grid down or zombie biker gangs, whatever floats your boat. Remember, it's the process. We focus on the process, and if we can get the process right, it's much more likely we will get the results we want. Brian, that's a very astute comment. Yes, if you have not done your area study, if you haven't started building your local intelligence network, if you have not been building real-time intelligence capabilities, you should. You're definitely behind the curve. And I know people are like, Mike, how can I get my ham radio license and do my TCCC cert and do all these things because there's not enough time? And man, you're right. You have to prioritize your needs. And it helps when you have a team of people because now all of a sudden we can get people who we can generalize in things and someone else can specialize in things. So we can learn how to do things generally, and we may not be the best at it, but we can get it done. And other people on our team can specialize in those things, be the best at it. So I'm here to give you the intelligence picture. And yes, I do want to put pressure on everyone to get their stuff together from the get-go, because I actually do think conditions have changed in terms of riot season. I don't think this is going to be on the order of summer 2020. But I'm looking at these far left groups, and they have been they say they've been demoralized, and they say that they can't get a black bloc together and go out and do things. And they've been saying that for the past couple of years. And now all of a sudden they look at what's happening in LA and they're like, yeah, you know what? Maybe we actually can go do this. Let's just go do it. And I think we're probably going to see some of that coming up this weekend during the National Day of Resistance on Saturday, June 14th, even though that is not exactly what June 14th is there for. Historically, we have seen the Antifa types kind of glom on to these movements just like they did with BLM, and that's an excuse to go out and riot. So this is not to say that we are going to have, I'm not trying to say this is going to be a repeat of the summer of 2020. I don't think it will. But if you had action in your area in the summer of 2020, there's a very good chance that we will see some semblance of that. And I actually think the risk is much higher now because President Trump, I think the Trump administration, they know what's up. One of the things that I've continually pointed out whenever we talk about low intensity conflict, and especially where it concerns insurgencies or proto-insurgencies, if there's a general rule from history, it is that the host nation government almost always waits too long to act. And by the time an insurgency has reached the stage of violence, it cannot be rolled back very easily. If you want to roll back an insurgency, you got to get after it in the organization phase. And now that we are into the violent phase, or we are on the cusp potentially of the violent phase, it'll be far more difficult. So I actually think the risk is higher now because we've seen 2-7 now deployed to Los Angeles. There may be another Marine battalion behind that, potentially. That's what I'm hearing. And we will have up to 4,000, maybe 5,000 National Guard troops, maybe somewhere around there. I think we're probably like 4,000 or somewhere. And if this is the response in Los Angeles, then we have to expect that this is going to be the response when this happens in Chicago or Minneapolis or Houston or New York or Atlanta or wherever else this may be happening. I hear people talking about Denver. Maybe Denver's the next place. I don't know. This ICE operation, this thing called Operation Safeguard, apparently they've been telling people in Los Angeles, get ready for this. We're going to be here for 30 days conducting operations. I'm only guessing after that 30 days if they're not done. By the way, the National Guard was authorized, I believe, according to the memo, for 60 days. But let's say for right now, our key assumption is that this is going to be over in early July, roughly 30 days from when it started. They're just going to pick up and go somewhere else. These ICE operations are happening all across the country. So what's happening in LA could happen literally to any other major city where there's ongoing ICE operations. But in terms of deploying other federal assets, we're seeing DEA, we're seeing ATF, we're seeing other federal law enforcement agencies taking part in this task force in Los Angeles. I can only assume after they're done in Los Angeles, they're going to go somewhere else to some other city. And I imagine the same people who are, maybe not the exact same people, but the same types of people who are fomenting this and organizing this and helping people mobilize in Los Angeles are just going to do that in the next city. So my point is, this is coming to a city near you, potentially. And regardless of whether you're preparing for riots or not, let's talk about what we can do at an intelligence level in terms of intelligence planning, getting our ducks in a row, getting your shit together to make sure that you are able to deal with whatever you're going to deal with. As always, put your questions and comments into the chat and I will get to them. If you use a Q, a capital Q at the beginning of your comment, I'll be able to see that much more easily. With that, we're going to talk about Urban Charger. This is an operation that we ran, an intelligence, a battle tracking operation we ran back in 2014. Hard to believe, 11 years ago we were doing this. And since then we have learned a lot. And we're going to go back to the very basic building blocks. But first, we're going to talk about some intelligence housekeeping. So when we talk about intelligence, it is always in support of something. It is in support of the mission. And you look at the intelligence cycle, and it begins with the receipt of mission. If you're in the military, or if you're supporting a decision maker on the policy side, there is a mission. The commander says, we want to do this. We're going to go into the Arghandab Valley and we're going to clear out these villages of Taliban. Okay, that's the mission. And now we, as intelligence personnel, as the intel folks, we have to look at that and say, well, how best can we support the mission? What does the commander need to know? What are his information requirements or intelligence requirements that he needs to know in order to continue planning this mission? So that's what we have to provide to him. So anything we do in intelligence, we have to start with the mission in mind. Because if we don't understand the mission, then we are not going to be able to produce the intelligence needed to support the mission. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about on a very tactical level or on a operational or strategic level. If we don't understand the commander's intent, if we don't understand what he's trying to do or understand the outcome that he wants to accomplish, we're not going to provide him with the intelligence that he needs. So we have to make sure that we understand that. And if you think, Mike, move on, you're belaboring the point, I'm really not, because a lot of people are trying to do things without any foresight or any collective knowledge or any common operating picture of what they're trying to accomplish. That's just a very bad way to do things. If you're building a house, like Let's maybe at least start with a picture of what this house should look like. What is the ultimate end objective or the end goal? And now we know what intelligence we can produce to help us get there. Okay, we'll move on. So, what is your mission? I would ask you this. What is a mission that you might undertake during a riot or civil unrest? And I ask you this because A, you need to consider it because it may be coming to a city near you. And also B, remember, it's the same process. It doesn't matter if you're not preparing for a riot, if you're preparing for a wildfire, a hurricane, a pandemic, whatever, zombie biker gangs. This is the same process we go through before we even get to phase one of the intelligence cycle. So for some of you, this might be, I work in a downtown area. I work in downtown Chicago, and there's an ICE facility, or I work in X city. There's an ICE facility 2 blocks away. I don't want to get caught up in an LA style riot or a 2020 BLM style riot at the ICE facility. So what is your mission? Your mission is, A, how do I generate early warning and maybe don't go into work before this riot kicks off, number one. But number two, if I do get caught up, you're basically going into some version of escape and evasion, urban E&E. You're trying to get out of an area, to use a technical term, you're trying to unass the area that you're in and get to a safer area. So maybe that's your one mission. Another mission may be you're trying to keep situational awareness. I was just talking with someone today, and it was this retired lady, and she said, I have kids in these major cities, and so I'm interested in what's happening in those cities. So maybe your mission is, I'm just trying to generate situational awareness so I can warn people that I love who live in those cities who are going to be completely oblivious to the risk of what's happening maybe down the street to them until after it's already happening. So think about maybe your mission is, people have asked me about Clay Barton's book of Concrete Jungle. It's a fantastic book. You should absolutely buy it. I thought it was an excellent book. Maybe you live in an urban environment in a high-rise building or an apartment somewhere, and you're just stuck and you say, I would leave, but I've got nowhere to go. I don't have a farm. I don't have my cousin's house or my parents' house 30 minutes outside of town. I don't know anyone in the area. I'm just going to hole up in my apartment building. Well, you should probably A, read that book, but B, your mission will probably be some level of maintaining situational awareness on what's going on, and then trying to determine your personal risk based on real-time information that's coming in. Unfortunately, most people are going to turn on the news, and that is going to be their primary and maybe only source of information. We'll talk about it here in just a sec. I'll tell you about all the things we did during Operation Urban Charger, which was the Ferguson riots. But we were producing intelligence updates anywhere between 5 to 15 minutes ahead of what cable and local news was putting out. So remember, intelligence has a shelf life. After so much time, current intelligence is no longer current. And in a riot, that shelf life is extremely small because 15 minutes can make a huge difference in where rioters are, whether a protest has turned into a riot, what the police response is. 15 minutes, it may as well be 15 years. So at any rate, the whole point is just identify what you're trying to do, your end goal, your stated outcome, and then we are going to start looking at how do we produce intelligence so that we can achieve that mission. All right, let's talk about intelligence gaps, PIRs, and how to generate early warning. The real thing you want to be able to do in a situation like a riot is be able to generate early warning so that I am not there when this thing pops off, or I can leave work early on Tuesday afternoon at 3 p.m. because I know the protest is going to start at 4 and it's going to go downhill from there. So really what we want to do is be generating an early warning. That starts with our intelligence gaps. Now, an intelligence gap is a piece of information that we need to know, but we do not know. So for instance, in this scenario, one of the first things I would start looking at, let's say I lived in downtown Chicago and Chicago was the next spot for large scale ICE enforcement operations. The first thing I would be asking is obviously when, but even before I ask when, I would say who is involved. If I anticipate protests, let me figure out which protest groups are going to be involved or potentially be involved. So we're looking at protest organizations, which could be local, they could be statewide or regional, they could be national. I'm going to look at activist organizations. I'm going to look at militant groups. So your Antifa, your associated far left groups, whoever's out. In this case, we'd be looking at Mexican nationalist groups potentially. I'm sure they're in cities other than LA, but as I understand it, it's a particularly bad problem in LA specifically. So I'm looking at all the groups involved. That is an intelligence gap for me at the outset because I don't know which groups are involved. So does that make sense? We think about the things that we need to know. And then we say, well, this is an intelligence gap. I have to have more knowledge. I've got to have more information about this particular topic, whatever it may be. So that's the first thing you need to understand. People ask me, Mike, what are the building blocks? What is the foundation level knowledge to get started in intelligence? Understanding what an intelligence gap is number one. Well, it's maybe not be number one, but it's up there. That is something crucial. You have to be able to identify your intelligence gaps. And then I would also say one of the best things that you can do to improve generally intelligence awareness in your group is simply understanding what has intelligence value, what information has intelligence value, and what information does not have intelligence value. So for me, if I were running a group, let's say I had some neighbors in my apartment building in this scenario, I would first of all tell them, I would say, here are intelligence gaps. If you see anything, and if you want to be more formal, we turn these into collection requirements. But at a very basic level, I would just say, guys, these are our intel gaps. Here are the 5 things that we need to know. And so if you come across any information that satisfy these 5 things, then let me know. So that's one of the first things I would do. And then I would explain to them what has intelligence value. And intelligence value for us is typically going to be proximity. If it is within our area of operations, it has a much higher likelihood of having intelligence value if it is far away. So me, I'm in Central Texas. If one of my group members came to me and said, "Oh, Mike, there's riots in LA," I'd say, great for them. That has no bearing on our mission here, unless there was some other, intelligence link there. But that alone in itself is not particularly relevant to my area, other than LA riots may mean riots are more likely elsewhere. So the point I want to get across is understand what has intelligence value. Make sure your people understand what has intelligence value, because if they come across a piece of information and they think, oh, this is actually very important, they're much more likely to pass it on. Whereas if they don't understand the mission of what we're trying to accomplish and they don't understand what an intelligence gap is, they may not report it back to us, which would be potentially mission critical failure. All right, beyond intelligence gaps, I'm trying to keep this very, very basic here, but there's a thing called a PIR. That is a priority intelligence requirement. Okay, PIR. That is the most important intelligence requirement at any given time that we're trying to solve. That is an intelligence question or an intelligence problem that we are trying to solve. So for instance, before I get to that, PIRs are almost always tied to a decision point. So for instance, if we're in a conventional army unit and okay, let's say you're in the Ukrainian army, and the question is, or the general scenario is, we think the Russians are going to attack our position or try to come to our town or anytime to midnight. Well, the next big investigation, well, what is their line of attack? What are their avenues of approach? Man, this always happens in the afternoon. Sorry if I'm cutting out here. This always happens. We always get, I don't know why, the internet starts cutting out. at any rate, sorry, I don't know how much of that you got and didn't get. We'll back up just a second. You're in Ukraine. You're expecting the Russians to attack your village. The question is, what is their line of attack? What's their avenue of approach? How are they going to get from where they are to where we are? And let's say we determine that there are 3 potential avenues of approach. Okay, they can cut through this forest. There's a road through this forest. Okay, that's avenue of approach number 1. This avenue of approach number 2 is there's a bridge where they can drive tanks across. This bridge is rated for certain tanks. It can sustain the weight of a tank or a tank column, and they're going to come in this way. And then number 3, I don't know. Let's just say there's a potential landing zone where they could do an airborne drop. Okay, this is not realistic for this point of the war, but let's just say, okay. So those are our 3 main avenues of approach. And so the next thing that we do, especially as an intelligence analyst at like an S2 shop, you would start looking for indicators. Okay, so we look for indicators that would give us some clue as to which avenue of approach they're going to use. They're going to come through the forest, they're going to come over this bridge, or they're going to drop into this field in airborne or air assault, whatever. I don't even know if the Russians have air assault, but let's just say they do. So the commander's question might be, will the Russians choose to attack us via avenue of approach number 2? Okay, they're coming over the bridge. A really good PIR typically is answered with a yes or a no. It's typically not going to be open-ended. Like, identify the method of attack that the Russians will take after tomorrow night, or whatever. Okay, that's a little too vague. It will be, will the Russians choose to attack on avenue of approach number 1, avenue of approach number 2, avenue of approach number 3? This is a decision point for the commander. The commander needs to know this as soon as possible so that he can make plans and dedicate a limited number of resources and manpower, especially a limited amount of time, to preparing for this Russian assault. So if we determine that the Russians are most likely to choose the bridge, well, maybe we blow the bridge, or maybe we, whatever the commander decides to do. And now, so this would be a PIR. I hope everyone understands this. So let's take this scenario, which I described horribly, and let's apply it to our apartment complex in downtown Chicago in anticipation of these protests and riots. The question would be, how far do these protesters or rioters need to be in proximity of our apartment building before we try to leave? And so let's just say if there are protests or rioters within 1 mile of our apartment building, we're going to grab our stuff and go, and we're going to try to get out. Or maybe it's more than 1 mile. This is just an example. Okay, so this would essentially be your PIR. Will protests or rioters attempt to attack this building in our area? Okay, maybe it's an ICE facility, maybe it's a police precinct, maybe it's a bank, maybe it's a shopping center, mall, whatever it is. And just for this scenario, that might be our PIR. So the question is, what information do we need in order to reach a decision point, whether we're going to stay, whether we're going to go from this apartment complex? My next question is, how can we find this information out before this protest or riot gets to this location and potentially directly threatens us? So I would be looking for social media accounts to follow. If there are websites, I know 20,000 people have sent me nokings.org. So that's the website. I would look on there and see where that protest is starting. If it's a march, what's the start point? What's the end point? I would also be looking at potentially news coverage of the event. Maybe there's a protest permit. Okay, this is all open source information. Maybe I can get that from the city. And I can see, well, this protest is scheduled to start at 6 p.m. and go till 9 p.m. And I know that because they filed they got a permit from the city. So that's something I would also look at. In general, my question is, where will information be available prior to this event taking place? This is absolutely crucial if we're going to generate early warning and try to get a jump on this event. And the next thing is, what indicators should I be looking for? So Antifa is pretty well known to use scouts. Okay. They have very rudimentary, but in many cases, very effective information collection, extremely effective information collection. So if I see a guy on a bike, maybe he's just riding around the block a few times, but maybe not. Maybe he's conducting essentially pre-operational reconnaissance or surveillance on a target. And so next thing, I would start to look for indicators. What would I expect in this area if there were rioters that were going to attack this building or attack, my neighborhood or whatever? Scouting would be a very obvious one. If the area is implicated in any way in these larger protest permits, if these groups have a history of being active in your neighborhood, if they're active in my neighborhood in 2020, I might anticipate they're going to be active in my neighborhood in 2025. So those are just some very general things I would be looking at. But if at all possible, we want to generate early warning. We want to be able to anticipate this and not be caught behind it. So with this in mind, let's talk about this case study. Operation Urban Charger. It's myself, a fellow intelligence analyst who was stationed in South Korea at the time, and like 6 or 8 different volunteers who just said, yeah, sure, Mike, we'll jump on. We did all this through Discord. It was before we got nuked in 2020. And then, we never went back to Discord really after that. Unfortunate. But I mentioned that to say literally anybody could do this. You could do it over Discord very easily. So it's 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri. We're waiting for this news of whether this police officer is going to get charged with the shooting of Michael Brown. And we were listening to, we're listening to a police scanner. And this was just kind of a perfect storm. Hang on. Sorry, guys. Just one second. We're listening to a police scanner, and this was a perfect storm because in order to have interoperability, everyone was transmitting in the clear. So we had Ferguson police, we had the county sheriff's office, we had the state police, and we had, in many cases, federal law enforcement, or in some cases, federal law enforcement, and the National Guard, all transmitting on the same channels in the clear. It will never happen again. But we got extremely, I wouldn't want to say lucky, but it was the only reason why we were able to get so much signals intelligence from the area. So at any rate, we're listening to the police scanner and we heard this call sign, Warfighter 33. And just looking, I didn't immediately know who Warfighter 33 was, but just through some context clues, obviously this is the National Guard commander. The National Guard was deployed to Ferguson in anticipation of these riots. And we were about, it was either 30 or 60 minutes, I forget which one, 30 or 60 minutes before the No True Bill came out. Warfighter 33 came on the radio and started telling all the National Guard units, whether they were static checkpoints or whatever they're running, to kind of get on station and get prepared. And so this for us, if the National Guard was standing up and getting ready, and he used some kind of terminology, I forget it was. It's in the back of the book. If you have my old book that I published back in 2014, 2015 called SHTF Intelligence, it's in the annex. It's a line-by-line transcription of what we heard on the radio. At any rate, that was a big red flag for us. And we were able to generate 30 to 60 minutes of early warning. If the National Guard is going and starting to man these checkpoints, it's about to be on. And so we expected that a No True Bill would come out, that this police officer would not be charged. Sorry, guys, hang on one second. All right, so at any rate, this Darren, whatever his name was not charged. And that was announced, and people just started going ape shit. I mean, it just was wild. So we were able to battle track the situation, and I'm going to break it down and tell you what we did. And what I want you to do is not just watch this and be like, oh yeah, Mike, that's cool. That's interesting. I want you to think about how you can do this for yourself. And then I want you to go do this for yourself. coming up, June 14th is this National Day of Resistance. Practice, just even spend a couple hours on Saturday night, Saturday evening. Just practice this, even if it's just for an hour. Sit at your computer, hop on social media. If you have a police scanner, great. Or if you live in an area where you can still listen into a police scanner, great. I would say still listen into a police scanner because there's a lot of non-law enforcement traffic that still may be of value. But otherwise, just practice taking in raw information. Hop on Google Earth, it's free, and just start dropping pins and battle track the situation. If you see a video of a cop car on fire in your city, let's just say riots do break out, and you see that on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you're surfing, get on Google Earth, look in the background of where that vehicle is, and find a landmark, the name of a store, a street corner, or whatever, and drop a pin and just say, cop car on fire. Here's the rough address, or here's the street, or here's the address of the Foot Locker or whatever's in the background, or Target or whatever. And just practice doing that. Get a feel for what that operational tempo feels like. Get a feel for what it's like to do this in a real world situation. So at any rate, I highly recommend you do this. Let's go ahead and talk about what we did. All right, so for Urban Charger, we had real-time information coming in. So we were listening to a police scanner. There was other radio traffic as well. We had ham radio operators listening in to ham traffic and listening into other bands and feeding us information. The way this worked is people would hear information and they would get on Discord, and we just had this chat feed going on. People just constantly putting information in, okay? And that was basically like our intel traffic for the night. And we started at like, I don't remember what time, in the afternoon. The No True Bill came on. I told everybody in the Discord, I'm like, hey, everyone, like, let's get online and let's start here. And we did this till about 2 a.m. and the riots continued going. But this was a real proof of concept for us. Yes, actually, if you know even just the basics of what you're trying to accomplish, yes, you can produce real-time intelligence on a riot situation, and you actually can produce intelligence products and maintain situational awareness in the security picture. So that's what we did. At any rate, we're listening to the police scanner. We had other radio traffic. At this time, there was this thing called Periscope. That was Twitter's video feed. And so we had all these people in the areas. This was kind of not necessarily the birth of live streaming, but it was like one of the main times where people at that point in time were live streaming the riot. And so we had all those feeds up, and we were data mining Facebook and Twitter, following these reporters who are reporting on scene, providing real-time information. A lot of the stuff that was pushed out over social media by these reporters didn't actually make it to the news segment. And I know that because we were watching it. We consistently beat cable and local news by 5 to 15 minutes, which again, in a riot, may as well be 15 years in some cases, because these riots can progress very rapidly. We heard gunshots during the police scanner. There was a point in time in that night where an AR-15 was stolen out of a police cruiser, number one. And then we also heard gunshots in the background of people shooting at law enforcement in Ferguson, Missouri during these riots, or during this particular riot. And on the news the next day, I remember I wanted to throw my TV out the window. These newscasters said, no, there was no one shooting at police. That's bullshit. And actually, I got to go find this old laptop that I have, or this old computer. I recorded the whole thing, recorded everything. And you can distinctly hear gunshots in the background. And actually, there was a police officer that said he was taking fire from these right after you hear those gunshots. So this is another reason why you cannot depend on the news for your real-time intelligence information, because they will just straight up lie to you about anything. So we've got to go to primary sources, and as much as possible, that's what we did here. And then we did have some human sources on the ground in the Ferguson area, passing stuff up, text message, or dropping it into Discord. So we had all these real-time inputs. Okay, we had multi-source, what you might call all-source inputs. We had SIGINT, we had OSINT, We had human. We didn't really have imagery. I guess photos and videos would probably be the closest that we had to imagery. But if we had a drone at the time, then okay, now we've got IMET here. So we've got the four major intelligence disciplines that I highly recommend you know how to run or know how to collect through. And then on the backside of this, our output was real-time intelligence. So we battle tracked the situation whenever a lot of times we would not have a good picture of where the rioters were at any given time. But when law enforcement was told to go to this place to join a skirmish line, we knew where police were. And if police were there would be rioters there as well. So anytime those skirmish lines moved, anytime those police moved and went to a new checkpoint, they would radio it in. We would listen to that. We would drop a pin or move a pin. So we were battle tracking this situation. And again, this was back in 2014. And now a lot of people are battle tracking a lot of different things. And I have not done battle tracking as much because it just does not have a lot of utility. It's interesting. It's cool to look at. But unless you're there, it just does not have a lot of utility. That said, if people want to battle track, if we do have riots this summer, that's fine. We're building this new open source intelligence platform and trying to automate a lot of this stuff. And if you're a Fort Observer member and you want to help battle track, I'll teach you how to do it. And you can battle track to your heart's content. At any rate, so we're mapping events as they occurred. We're visualizing raw data. We're taking this information that was happening from essentially the battle space. We're putting it on a map and maintaining situational awareness. And most importantly, we're maintaining a real-time security picture so that we could tell you what were the worst parts of the area, the parts to avoid. If I was trying to help or assist someone leaving the area, I could tell them, hey, 2.5 miles away, you've got some riders. They're to the northeast of you. So probably don't go to the northeast of your location. And again, we do this for riots, but it may be anything for you. It may be, maybe you're tracking flooding or tracking disaster response after a hurricane or an earthquake or whatever. Just this weekend's protests and potentially riots are just going to be a really good opportunity for you to do these things. So this is one of our maps. This is on Google Earth. And those green pins, you can see Warfighter 33 there in the center of the screen. One of the cool things about Warfighter 33 is initially we didn't know exactly where he was. And so that was an intelligence gap. Where is this National Guard command post? And so we added it to our list of collection requirements. So those are pieces of information, okay, specific pieces of information that we want. And one of them was, identify the location of the National Guard command post, Warfighter 33. And someone sent in a picture. Someone dropped a picture in there of this tent. It's like a GP medium. It was an Army tent. And it had a bunch of antennas and it had a satellite dish out front. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that's a command post, right? All these antennas, they're communicating with people. Like that's exactly where they are. And you look in the background and in tiny little but bright red letters, it said Target. They were in the Target parking lot. And so we went to our map. We dropped a pin. Warfighter 33 is right here in this Target parking lot. We know that because now we have this picture that we got off of Twitter or Facebook or wherever it was. And now we know where they are, at least as of the date of information, that date time group. So the other pins there are National Guard units. This is just an example to give you kind of a picture of maybe what this looks like. And then down there in St. Louis, there's Tango 2 and 3. I still don't know who those belong to, but those were obviously tactical units. Maybe they were sitting in reserve. I don't know. But that's Tango 2 and 3, at least for the longest time, stayed down there. And then you have this National Guard Humvee there kind of to the southwest-ish part of the screen, right near Clayton. And I don't know, maybe an LT got lost, but he was definitely not in the right place. LT. All right, and then we can zoom in, and we had these roadblock locations set up. And so they're shutting down traffic at a couple of different places, mainly on that main drag there. So this is just an example of, what a very basic product might look like. Maybe like a current overlay, current or sit temp or something like that, situational template. And then we did this again for North Shore in 2016. So up North Shore was the 2016 Republican National Convention, where there were protests and more riots popped off. Hard to believe we've lived through 10 years of this bullshit, but we have, or almost. Actually, yeah, if you want to count the riots against like the white nationalist groups back in 2015, we are right at 10 years of this. At any rate, this was North Shore. That green area was the Quicken Loans Stadium. That was kind of the green zone for the Republican National Convention. And then that red box in the center there, that was like something stupid, like the free speech zone or the protest zone or something like that. But you can see lots of protesters outside the protest zone. And all those are just a description with a time. So what is that, 1523? I don't know. I can't tell what time that is. So at 3:23 local time, we noted that there were protesters at that location. Okay, that's all that is. All right, guys, listen, we are, I don't know, whatever, 40 minutes into this. I will take your questions. I'll stick around and answer some questions. I know we have some. Let me also say this. This is one of the things that we talk a lot about, special projects, which is a private training membership. But I want to just share this with everyone. Your ability to influence your future doesn't start with your guns. Doesn't start with how much food you have. Doesn't matter how big your bug out bag is or whatever. It starts with you. It starts with your personal authority. It starts with your skills, with your knowledge, and your personal authority. Because that's why people will follow you, is because you have some level of authority. Personal authority is great. We have to take that and build a tribe around that. So you have to be a member of a tribe. You've got to have your tribe at the local level. You do not want to go through the next 10 years of our future. You may not want to go through the next 10 months of our future alone. You've got to do it with the tribe. I would say, as a corollary to that, you've got to have an intelligence network. You have to have people sharing information about what's going on. Because we can act on intelligence. If we're not producing intelligence, acting becomes much more difficult. Being proactive becomes much more difficult, if not impossible. So we have to we got to take that tribe and that network and then be able to produce intelligence. Intelligence reduces uncertainty about the future. The more certainty we have, well, that's probably the wrong word. The less uncertainty we have, the more we're able to determine what is more likely and what's less likely to happen in the future. And when we understand what is more likely to happen, we can start being very deliberate in how we prepare for that future. That is going to potentially give us, if we have personal authority, we've got a tribe and an intelligence network, and we're producing local intelligence, that is going to give us the opportunity to shape local outcomes. There are people in charge who may not have your best interests at heart. They probably have their best interests at heart. I don't want those people making decisions for me. I don't want people writing the law, those people writing the laws under which I have to live or I'm expected to live. And a lot of people live that way. I don't want to live that way. The more we are able to shape local outcomes and influence our future, influence whether that neighborhood or your HOA level or subdivision, all the way up to your town, maybe that's up to your county. It's fantastic. That enables us to regain some sovereignty over ourselves in the future. And it's at this point where we can start to leverage, because if we have power at this level, we can leverage that and we can start to exercise power over our future and influence the people who live around us for better strategic outcomes. So not to geek out on everyone, but I look at this, I say, well, this is the way. The future does not belong to the person who has the most guns or the most stuff. It's bullshit. The future belongs to the person who can bring the most people to the fight. Maybe that's a kinetic fight. I don't know. But I know it's a political fight, and I want to bring a lot of people to that fight. And it's a social fight. That's how we keep the bad stuff out. I want to bring a lot of people to the social fight. It's an economic fight. Money is stored power. I want to bring a lot of people and a lot of resources to that fight, because money does solve some problems. And so if we have money to solve those problems, then we individually and collectively will be far better off than not having those things. Ever since 2016, like when those anti-Trump riots first started, when I first saw like, oh, these Antifa people, who are they? And I started reading more about it. And then I started realizing like, hey, these guys are like proto-insurgent groups. I've got a lot of experience with insurgent groups. And so I started reading more about violent social movements throughout history and reading more about low intensity conflicts. What did all these insurgencies and these revolutionary movements in other countries all throughout history, looking for answers? How did these things work? How were they successful? Why were they not successful? Why did they fail? Why did the people who win? And why did the people who lose? Or why did they win or lose? And the thing that I came up with, the most important takeaway from all of this, is you have to build political, social, and economic power. In no instance in any of my reading on low intensity conflict, insurgencies, guerrilla wars, separatist movements, secession movements, revolutionary movements, violent social movements, terror campaigns, all that low intensity conflict stuff. Low intensity conflict exists beneath the threshold of conventional war. So we're not talking about tanks and bombers. Okay, we're not talking about World War II or Russia, Ukraine, which is predominantly conventional. But low intensity conflict is above routine peaceful competition. So this is not just, hey, let's get our guy elected, and if we lose, we shake hands with the other team and we walk away. Okay, this is far above that. This is where we are. The United States is not at war with each other, at least not outright. We're definitely not at peace with each other. We're in this gray zone. Okay, this is called low intensity conflict. It's a space between war and peace. It's where we are right now. And when you go out and you read what has happened in other countries in these gray zone conflicts, these domestic conflicts, the low intensity types, not a single time did I read that. And I looked at the losing people and I said, they just needed less political power. These guys just needed less social power, and they probably would have. These guys just needed less money. They just needed less economic power, and they probably would have won. Never does that happen. But in every case, I looked at the losing side and said, what would have really helped them? If they had more political power, if they had more social power in their country, if they had more economic power in their country, they probably could have won this thing. And that's why it's incumbent. And I say us, or like we, in like the royal we. This is me too, but this is also you. So I'm sharing this with you. You have to have political, social, and economic power. Not only do you have to have it, you have to know how to use it. And so in terms of this being the way, all this stuff starts with you at your individual level, your personal authority. Like, why are you watching this stream right now? Probably because I know what I'm talking about when it comes to intelligence. I have a certain level of personal authority when it comes to intelligence in low intensity conflict. You've got to build that for yourself if you haven't already, for your own local neighborhood. Then it tells a lot of things. Maybe we'll talk about that during a future point. We'll move on to questions, but I just want to say, this is the way, brother. This is the stuff we got to be developing. This is how you win low intensity conflict, which may well be upon us in ways that we have not yet experienced, not at least in our lifetimes. With that, I will go ahead and get to the questions and comments. So if you will just bear with me, 2020 was exhilarating. Do you think this ties in with what Sarah Adams predicted? I don't know. I texted Sean Ryan a couple weeks ago about this June 14th stuff, and I was just like, hey, man, there's going to be probably 3 million people out at these protests across the country. There may be more than that, but I think 3 million is probably a really good estimate to start off with, but it could be larger. I said, look, if there are terror groups that want soft targets of hundreds of thousands of people gathered, we know these people are not armed. So just kind of out of left field, I don't think anything like that will happen, but it's not zero. So I don't think this is a direct tie-in with what Sarah Adams is predicting. But, I just started thinking about all that stuff, and I'm just like, well, shut up. They just bring it up just as a possibility. Not that I think that's what is going to happen, but there's obviously, I think, probably a very high likelihood of violence at some level coming up this weekend. So if they've been saying they didn't have the juice to organize a black bloc, and now all of a sudden they are, do you think they're liaising with Trinidad Tobago or some such. Um, I, I I don't know about in LA. The thing, what I see in LA, and I'm not from there. I haven't been paying attention hour by hour to what's happening in LA. But I think there's obviously a lot of Mexican nationalists there and people who do not want to see their people deported from the United States. I'm sure at some level, I know there are these militant anarchist groups, the revolutionary leftist groups in LA. I'm sure they're active. I don't look at a lot of that rioting and saying, and I don't look at that and say, well, this is a classic Antifa riot. I think this is obviously some level of leftism. But I don't look at that and say, well, okay, this is clearly black bloc. I think a lot of it was probably just pissed off Mexicans. That's my view. I don't have any insight into LA. I've been to the airport, but I've never even been to LA. So I couldn't tell you. In terms of their liaising with cartels, I don't know. I saw someone say there was some MS-13 there and something going on. I don't know exactly what it was. I'm not saying it's impossible. It probably would not be my first guess. Any value in trying to do some SIGINT at one of these No Kings protests? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth going and getting within radio or within earshot with a radio receiver and just listening in. I would say if you do, record what you can. And it's great if you have a police scanner that has a SIM card so you can record those transmissions. So is there value in it? Yeah, in terms of just going to a general area and just scanning for transmissions that could be have some level of intelligence value. Yeah, in general, I think that's valuable. But here's my thing with SIGINT. Okay, SIGINT's great. I love SIGINT. You literally cannot do this job without SIGINT. But the value of signals intelligence that you're going to get is 100% dependent on if there are signals transmitting anything of intelligence value. When we did those SIGINT exercises down in Houston, Mojave Repeater they have a RTO course, radio telephone operator course, and they teach people. By the way, if you can go to one of their classes, it's fantastic. Mojave Repeater. Speaking of 29 Palms. Go to one of their communications courses, fantastic. But let me just tell you, we went out there and there was so much noise. We were getting transmissions from a movie theater. We're getting transmissions from just all sorts of stuff that we were not looking for. It was a highly congested environment. Looking for short duration transmissions from these guys was literally like finding a needle in a haystack. So that's one problem that you're going to run into. If you're trying to do SIGINT in a built-up environment where there's just a lot of signals, you're going to have to wade through that and be very meticulous with how you scan, what you scan, and how you document those whatever transmissions are out there. The reverse of that is if you're in a very, very rural environment, there's just not going to be a lot out there. You still have to run SIGINT just because the value of information that's being broadcast via even bubble pack walkie-talkies could be of immense intelligence value. So that's my caveat on SIGINT. But otherwise, yeah, sure. How are things in Austin? Heating up, brother. Warmer by the day in more ways than one. All right, guys, just a reminder, if you have a question, just please put a capital Q at the beginning of your question or comment so I can just scroll through these. Yeah, I saw this too. Al-Qaeda leader, whoever, Heidi Salami, has now just called for American Muslims to wage jihad on U.S. soil and to assassinate Trump, Vance, Elon Musk. I saw that. Let's just maybe assume that's true. I don't know that for a fact if it's true or not. I'm sure people who know these things do know whether it's true. But I don't know. FBI came out just a day or two ago and said there's no credible threats to the military parade. Obviously, this raises the stake Obviously, it's another reason why you should be prepared for potentially the worst. This could be, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a black swan, but be darn close. All right. Why do they hate Wendy so much? I don't know. Wendy didn't do nothing. All right, guys. Let's see here. Just looking for, I do need a co-host to help me come. Normally I have Jared on the early morning live streams every morning. I do have Jared to help me through these. I don't know. Who wants to volunteer? Who wants to volunteer to help me roll through these questions? Could the Epstein video affect responses from the current? Man, I don't know. I don't think Trump's really wrapped up in all this Epstein stuff. I could be wrong. I don't know that for a fact. Do you believe the map is circulating online showing where these protests are going to be is accurate? Yes. This is how they're, listen, I've been tracking Indivisible since 2016, since they first started. And by tracking, I mean, I get their emails. Sometimes I'll watch their live streams. I'm not like watching these people like a hawk, but let me tell you, they ask for volunteers and they say, hey, if you have an Indivisible group, then let us know where your protest is going to be and we'll put it up on the map. So is the map accurate? It's accurate to the degree that someone who is in the Indivisible ecosystem says there will be a protest. I can tell you from that April 5th and the April 20, whatever, like we had a local Indivisible protest here. It's like 5 or 10 people at this thing. So is it generally accurate? I'd say yes, it's generally accurate. But a lot of these protests do not have very many people at them. In terms of some locations seeming unlikely, that's probably some middle-aged white cat lady saying that she's going to hold a protest in her small little town. And maybe she is. But a lot of these protests are simply extremely small, if they happen at all. Do you think this could spread to suburban areas away from the main protest? Probably not. If there's going to be a protest in a suburban area, it's probably because people who live in that suburb are going to hold a protest. But in terms of these like large scale downtown insert city here riots, I would not expect riots to spill over into the suburbs. What are you going to attack? Right? I mean, everything they want. If there's an ICE facility in a suburb, or there's some federal law enforcement facility, if there's one of these detainment centers in a suburb, then yeah, that's probably your best bet in terms of the risk of that spilling over. But in general, no. Actually, yeah. How do I add you to this stream? I don't know. We'll do this next Tuesday if you're able. I'll send you the link. I guess I send you the link. I guess that's all I do. Does Russia, China, Iran, or other nations have their hand in riots and protests? There's that Twitter account or the X account, Data Republican. And I've just been very loosely following. But yes, there is, this guy's Turkish or something like that. Yes, his wife runs some group. I don't know. So is there some foreign nexus? Yeah, I actually think there is. Apparently she runs this billionaire's wife runs some pro-China account or some pro-China group. And I don't know. She would explain, that's her thing. I'm not going to try to explain it for her, but just follow, I think it's Data Republican on X. And she's been posting some very interesting stuff about who these NGOs are and where they're getting money from. And I think she's tied this back and basically proving that these NGOs are still getting money from the federal government, or there's still some kind of public grant funding for these groups, and they turn around and take that money. They turn around and do with it whatever they're going to do. How does readily available encrypted technologies like Signal, Meshtastic, even Baofeng radios affect the average person's ability to do SIGINT? Well, that's a great question. Anytime someone moves off of a radio and uses a phone like a Signal chat or whatever, that is going to greatly obstruct the average person's ability to do SIGINT. There's some, whenever we're talking about encryption, there's two things we're looking at. Number one is there's metadata, which is going to be attached to every encrypted signal. And then there's the content. Think of this like a postcard. If you mail a postcard, you can look at the back. You can see whoever you put as the sender, whoever you put as the recipient, and you can see the content. That's what's, and Doug, you probably know this. I'm just saying this for everyone else's education. Sending a postcard is like transmitting in the clear. We can see the sender, we can see the receiver, and we can see the content or hear the content. When you encrypt a message, that's like putting that postcard in an envelope, and now we're mailing it. We can still see the sender and receiver. We can still see some metadata, but the content is what is protected. So yes, in general, whenever anyone moves to some encrypted channel, unless we have the ability to decrypt on the fly or record that message and then decrypt it later, yes, we are going to be losing out on our opportunity to instantly get that information. Now, in terms of Signal, we know a lot of these left-wing groups, they use Signal. They use all of these. There's a handful of different platforms they use. And because that's how they share information. They take pictures. They have this map. One of the big things they're doing in 2020, basically, they had this off-site, basically an intel support team that was monitoring police scanners, monitoring the news, identifying where the police were at any given time, where they're setting up checkpoints, whatever. And they're putting it on a map, just like I showed you, just like we were battle tracking the Ferguson riots back in 2014. They do that. They take a screenshot. They push it out to Signal. And this is a case where maybe a handful of people, okay, maybe there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people out of a group of 20 or 50 that have a cell phone. So yes, this is a case where they can more often than not get that information and be updated. The average person is not going to be able to collect on that. Now, at the nation state level, of course, the Baofeng UV82, I don't know. I guess that's the encrypted version of Baofeng. I don't know. I don't follow all this stuff. But yeah, if it's encrypted, first of all, if it emits a signal, it can be tracked, number one. So we may not be able to listen into a conversation that's happening that's encrypted, but we still may be able to identify the point of origin for those transmissions. So I don't know. Hope that answers your question. In effect, if someone's moving off of transmitting in the clear on a radio and they're moving to some encrypted device, yes, that is going to greatly impact your ability, i.e. you will probably not be able to collect on it, the average person. All right, guys, any other questions? We're just at an hour. So listen, I do this every Tuesday. I give everyone a kind of a quick crash course in whatever intelligence topic we're discussing that day. Today we talked about things you can do in terms of intelligence planning to prepare for a riot. And then I do some Q&A. So with that, everyone, thanks so much for the support. I do this every Tuesday, starting around 2 p.m. Central Time. It's going to do it for this week. Thanks for watching. And until next time, be well and stay out front. Here's everyone's favorite song.